Kia ora everyone, I'm Ben G from the Wellington Social Society. Thank you for all coming tonight. So tonight we've got a panel about the campaign to stop the privatisation of Wellington Airport. I'll just introduce the Social Society for anyone who's not aware. So the Wellington Social Society is part of the New Zealand Federation of Social Societies. There's a group in Canterbury and in Dunedin as well. And we host educational events, monthly educational events like this one. We also do social events and some other stuff, just supporting left-wing and trade unionist causes. We publish a magazine, The Commonweal, which you can buy for $20. There's some copies up on the bar there. And if you're a member, it's free. There should be sign-up sheets floating around, so if you're interested in coming to more of our events, put your email down, or if you want to join. And yeah, so that's us. So I'll just introduce the topic as well, and we'll hand over to our panellists. So in 2023, the Wellington City Council commissioned a review of its balance sheet, which identified the council had a significant insurance risk associated with underinsurance in the context of a major disaster. This review recommended the sale of the full Wellington Airport shareholding and establishment of a perpetual investment fund to manage the council's underinsurance risk. The council began consulting the public on the sale as part of its 2024 long-term plan. In May 2024, the council voted to sell the airport shares after dishonesty and manipulation from councillors and bureaucrats about the severity of the underinsurance risk. After an effective Unions Wellington-led community campaign of protests, public forums, lobbying and other actions, and the determined resistance of several councillors, the so-called Airport 3 of Nureddin Abdurahman and Nīkau Wi Neera, who are here tonight, and Ben McNulty, the sale of the airport was voted down. So now I'll let our three panellists talk about that. So we've got Sabina Rizos-Shaw, who is a trade unionist based in Punaki and co-convener of Unions Wellington, the Wellington local affiliate council for the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, Te Kaua Kaimahi. We've got Nureddin Abdurahman, a Labour Party councillor for the Pai Kawakawa Southern Ward, and Nīkau Wi Neera of Ngāti Rangatira and Kaitahu, who was a Green Party councillor for the Te Whanganui Atara Māori Ward. So they'll all get about 5 minutes now to give a brief talk about the campaign.
Kia ora, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, so I'm Sabina.
Woo.
As was introduced, I'm one of the conveners of Unions Wellington. I've been in that role for at least 2 years, 3 years. And I was the convener of Unions Wellington at the time that we were running the campaign. I think I'm going to give like a bit of a timeline from Unions Wellington's perspective of what happened, and then they're still going to chime in with some interesting records after that. So basically, obviously, as we've just had an overview, there was an initial vote to investigate the sale of Wellington Airport, and that happened a little bit before our kind of direct involvement as Unions Wellington. So for me, my first kind of engagement with council was as a part of the Citizens' Assembly. So that was when I was first introduced to the idea of selling the airport, because so the Wellington City Council did a Citizens' Assembly. I was sort of randomly selected, and so I went along. And there was one guy in the Citizens' Assembly who was very, very passionate about selling the airport. And it really came up throughout the whole thing, but we had to reach a consensus. We did not reach consensus that we wanted to sell the airport. But it was introduced to me as something that people were quite, really thought was a smart fiscal idea based on this guy who felt very, very strongly about it. He spoke about it a lot over all of our sessions. So then, a little bit after that, at the Unions Wellington AGM, not the last one we had, but the one before, we voted as a committee, which was a motion that was brought forward by Ben McNulty, who's one of our committee members, to have a campaign around stopping the privatisation of Wellington Airport. And at that point, we sort of were under the impression that our kind of key thing that we would be doing would be getting a candidate elected in the by-election, the Wellington ward, who would oppose the sale of Wellington Airport, and from there everything would be like smooth sailing, because we had a majority left council and we had a Green Mayor, and we obviously weren't going to be privatising assets. So, so we voted to do a campaign, and then we ran a by-election forum, and we asked candidates about the airport, and we had accusations that we were a Green Party front, which is not something that we've been accused of since. So a few candidates didn't show up based on our questions, and that all of the candidates that did show up committed to not selling the airport, as far as I'm aware. But there were only 3 of them. So, and then one of those candidates was elected to the council, which is Geordie Rogers. And so Geordie was sort of an ally of Unions Wellington at that time, and I remember talking to him about when he first got elected, the sort of initial kind of inoculation from council staff, which was quite interesting. So you meet with the executive leadership team and they talk to you about like the council finances and the insurance risk and that sort of stuff, which I imagine if you are new to public office and maybe not as new to council. Okay, I'm going to refer to council officers throughout this, but what I mean is the executive leadership team. I don't mean the staff at the council who make all of our city run. I mean the people who are earning more than probably most of us can even imagine, and maybe understand that their role is not to take the place of elected officials. So anyway, if you're not sort of familiar with how they navigate, you might be quite shocked when you get newly elected and then they tell you that the city is about to fall down and central government is not going to save you. And I think that, like, I can't speak to obviously his experience, but it seems like that's a fairly consistent experience from other people who I've spoken to about their experience on council. You get on and the staff are really like, this is the way things work, and you need to navigate around that. So anyway, we at this point we've got a commitment from our by-election that people aren't going to sell the airport. We're expecting everything's going to be pretty smooth sailing, and we start planning our campaign. So I remember at this point we had a little subcommittee of the committee, so that was me and Ashok Jacob and Finn Cordwell, and then our sort of advisor, Ben Peterson, who was not as involved in the day-to-day, but who would sort of hit him up on things. So we mapped out a whole plan, and it was that we were going to have a public forum, and we were going to seek public commitments, and then after those public commitments, people were going to vote against the airport sale or would stop. But if that didn't work, we were going to try and convince people to vote against the long-term plan, and at that point, the airport sale would all stop. And then under that, we just wrote, burn it all down. So that was the plan. And we got some money from the Organising Activities Fund, which is something that we have access to as an affiliate of the CTU. So I think we ran the whole campaign on about $3,000, give or take. We spent most of that on our wonderful designer, Sam Butler, who made some really sick merch for the campaign so that we could all look really good while we were stopping the airport, which is actually, I think, kind of important in terms of community morale. Like, it made it seem like a real thing. But, so that's what we were up to. And then we sort of soft launched the campaign at the Newtown Fair, and people were not aware at the Newtown Festival necessarily that that this airport was potentially going to be sold. A lot of people weren't actually aware that the City Council even owned a portion of the airport, because it's generally run as a private corporation, but also the narrative was fairly consistently at the time that, like, we just didn't have any control over it, and that's what we kept hearing. Like, we don't have any control over it. And we actually chatted to this woman who worked for Infratil. She was like the environment officer for Infratil at the Newtown Fair, and she was like, your representatives on the board aren't even the people who are pushing for climate initiatives. And we were like, well, we'd like to change that. She did not sign the petition, but a lot of other people did, and we had a photo booth and people were taking pictures against privatisation, which was, yeah, all very cool. And then we started the kind of next portion of our campaign, which was amping up to a public forum to seek commitments against voting for an airport sale, which is when things started to get a bit complicated. Well, we became aware that we were going to meet more resistance than we had initially expected. So we had a bunch of coffees with all of the councillors and tried to talk to them about the campaign and about the airport vote. And we met with probably the majority of the council, which was actually was good. It was sort of bizarre that they were willing to come and meet with us. From my perspective, I was like, imagine like how many issues I could just go and have a coffee with a councillor on, apparently. But there was this big kind of issue of predetermination, which one of these two might speak to a little bit more when they get their chance. But essentially, we'd written this question about that we wanted people to answer at our forum, which we were inviting them to at these coffee catch-ups. And we were saying, you know, we essentially want a public commitment from you that you're not going to sell Wellington Airport. And because the consultation on the long-term plan hadn't happened yet, the councillors had been given legal advice that they weren't allowed to publicly commit to something because it would predetermine the long-term, their decision on the long-term plan. And so they were obligated to consult with the public and they couldn't already have an opinion. And this sort of was like a bit of a back and forth. It ended with, we had a meeting which was originally just supposed to be with Laurie Foon, but Laurie wanted to bring some support people along to that conversation, and so she brought along the Mayor and the Mayor's Chief of Staff and the Chief Financial Officer and the entire Green caucus from the council and Thomas Natch, who's on the Wellington City Council. And we had this meeting, and they were like, we can't come to the forum unless you change the question. And Laurie had already committed to coming to the forum, and I'd already publicised that she was coming to the forum, so I was quite keen. Although I kind of partially knew that she might pull out, so I thought it'd be more embarrassing if she just kind of after I'd advertised it. Anyway, we did change the question in the hope that that would make Tori want to come along, but she had already, as we found out later from McGoivers, which is official information act request from the council, she'd already decided that she wasn't going to attend weeks ago, but she sort of implied, we felt in that conversation, that she might attend if we changed the question, and then she was like, no, I'm not coming. And, which was disappointing. And we sort of, at that meeting, we were getting a lot of, and so it was me and Ashok and Finn and Ree from Climate Clinic, which is a organisation that we'd brought on to speak to some of the climate aspects of why it would be a bad idea to sell Wellington, the public stake in Wellington Airport and give it over to a private company that didn't have any obligations around sustainability or public interest. So yeah, we brought Ree along to this meeting. There's 4 of us. We were all quite like green, not in terms of necessarily party affiliation, but in terms of naivete. And it got really heated, and they were really, what we were getting from the Mayor's office is that they wanted us to come up with a solution where we could solve the insurance issue without selling the airport. And we were like, oh, okay, we'll go and we'll find a solution for you. Because we're like committed. Like, we don't want you to sell the airport, we will find a solution to this insurance issue. As though the premise that, there was, the premise of insurance, the premise that they were making this decision because they had to, as opposed to because they were manufacturing a crisis so that we would all, in a disaster capitalism way, kind of freak out and just allow them to sell off public assets. As though all of that wasn't happening, we were like, you're on our side and you want us to help you find a solution. And we brought Craig Rennie, who's the CTU policy chief economist guy, along to the beginning of that meeting when we were sort of working with him. And we were like, Craig, you're going to help us find a solution. And like, obviously Craig had done this rodeo before, so he was sort of like, we're not going to find a solution, guys. But he was sort of playing along with us. And we went to another meeting with the mayor's office a couple of weeks later, and again I was like, I've come up with these ideas, but how you can... And they were like, no, that wouldn't work. And it's like, you know, obviously, they've got many degrees and jobs in modelling and economics and KPMG reports and stuff, that they'd been moving in a direction to set up the ability to sell the asset. They weren't wanting to hear from the activists what the alternative plan was, but I think it was like a useful way to maybe placate us and sort of be like, yeah, you know, here's a good thing for you to use your time on instead of mobilising the public. So anyway, we had this forum. We've been inviting people to the forum. We had 9 councillors come along to our forum, and we also had Ben McNulty, who wasn't able to attend, give apologies but commit to voting against the airport sale. And so at our public forum, we had Reid from Climate Clinic and Ashok from the committee and Craig from the CTU speak about the airport sale. We had some Q&A, and we also got all of the councillors to answer the questions. And what we had referred to this in, this was actually the reason that the mayor gave for not showing up to the event, even though, as I said, we found out later she decided weeks earlier that she wasn't going to attend. But the reason that they gave is that we referred to asking the councillors a question as pinning, which is a community organising term for putting someone in a position where they have to answer a yes or no question, which is something that politicians don't really like to do. So that's what pinning is. And so we had an agenda, and then we had on the agenda, Finn pins the councillors, because that was Finn's role, was to ask the question. It had to be a yes or no question. And the Mayor's Chief of Staff said that in an email to me, I think the day of the forum, that she was used to non-violent green kaupapa and was quite shocked by our use of such violent language. Anyway, so we changed the question and we tried to be unviolent with our questioning forum. And at that forum, we got enough public commitments from the councillors there. So Iona Pannett didn't feel ready at that time to answer the question, so she declined to, which under the pinning rules is a no, but being a bit lenient. And Tim Brown came along and he said no to the question because he wanted to sell the airport, which I guess was not really a surprise to us. Like, we met him for coffee and he had made it very clear that he was very excited about the sale. So, but like, it was nice that he came along and said that to our public. But yeah, we got enough commitments at that forum that it looked like the vote was going to essentially stop the sale of the airport. And then, and we got probably about 150, maybe union numbers, 5,000 people. No, we got about 150 to 200 people in Thistle Hall, and it was amazing. Like, people turned out, everyone was wearing Keep the Airport Ours badges, and people were really shocked that like a publicly owned asset could be sold without any kind of mandate. You know, like the council that they had elected had not indicated that they would sell public assets. And in fact, like, you know, the majority of people in that room would have voted for the Labour and Green or independent but left-wing candidates on the council. And like, in the Labour Party and the Green Party manifestos, it says that you won't sell public assets. So that, you know, people felt betrayed, and they turned out because they felt betrayed, and they wanted to stand up and say, this is actually not what we voted for, we are your constituency. So we were feeling pretty good after our forum. We got in the commitments we needed, but and then we commissioned a poll, which was Etu, who's one of the biggest private sector union in New Zealand, another CTU affiliate, helped us out with that, and we did a poll, and it said it was 76% believe. of Wellingtonians all across the different wards didn't want to sell the airport. And it was really like, it was a majority in every ward, and highest majority in Southern Ward, but also Laurie Foon's ward. And the next part of what happened is that there was the vote, the initial vote, and Laurie Foon, who was a Green Party candidate and the Deputy Mayor, decided to vote against the public commitment that she had made and instead to vote to sell the airport. So then we did a big submission, organised a bunch of people to come out, and we all wore Keep the Airport Ours t-shirts to our long-term plan hui. During that submission, we got security called on us by one of the councillors who felt that it was a fire risk that there were so many people in the council chamber, and I guess particularly that they were, I don't know, miscreants. Which was sort of like a narrative that we got a little bit from a number of the councillors during the time. There was this idea that they were quite afraid of being physically in the same space as like our public, which felt quite offensive because it was at the same time that the Kantala swimming pool campaign was being run, and a lot of the people who were involved in that were kind of like actually making threats to councillors and being really inappropriate. And we had like just a bunch of workers who were like, can you not sell our stuff, actually? And we were the ones that were getting pushed back and having security called. And then we started, there was a couple of like articles trying to sort of justify the sale of Wellington Airport, and in particular, so we wrote an article in response to Joel McManus's article in the Spin-Off about why the airport should be privatised, which was originally called 5 Reasons Why Tory Whānau and Joel McManus are wrong about the sale of Wellington Airport, but we had to rename it because Joel was actually the editor. So we did a big push to try and get people to do submissions. We turned out at the long-term plan vote, although less enforced for that one, just because it was very clear from the conversations that we were having with councillors beforehand that they had basically been told that if they voted to amend the long-term plan or they voted down the long-term plan at the time that it was being put through, they would be going against the Local Government Act. And it was sort of unclear what that would mean, but the implication was like maybe the council might collapse or something. So yeah, they were given some legal advice that made people feel like they needed to vote for the long-term plan. And I'm not entirely sure. There were other councils that ended up not voting in their long-term plans or ended up making amendments on the day, and they were not held liable for those decisions. So it's sort of unclear whether or not that legal advice was kind of given in good faith. But anyway, so the long-term plan was put in place, and then we were in our burn it all down stage. So we tried to run a people's referendum, which probably none of you heard about because it was very low-key. There was a lot of us sort of talking to people at the Newtown market and trying to door knock to get people to participate in our people's referendum. We got actually most people didn't want to sell the airport based on the people's referendum, but we didn't really, as a small organisation, have the kind of ability to do surveying in the same way that a polling company or the council does. So, but luckily, at that point, our councillors, who were our Airport 3, had been working on a new plan to try and save the airport, and so there was a what I'm going to refer to as a NOM, which I can't remember as the notice of motion. There was a notice of motion to essentially stop the sale of the airport, and there was again some quite interesting decisions around legal advice to councillors during both the writing of that notice of motion and also on the day and the impacts of what would happen if people voted for it. And there was, I think, in my opinion, like a lot of like extremely bad faith scaremongering. I'm not sure whether or not these two will want to talk about that a little bit more, but yeah. But basically, that happened. We went along to the final vote. It was the most attended council meeting since the 90s, I think. We had to have an overflow room of unionists with signs saying that they didn't want to see the airport sold, and in the end, the norm passed, or at least the part about stopping the sale of the airport passed. And then there was a lovely spin-off story, which was essentially, I think, in some ways, thank you, Ollie, group therapy for the campaign, because we spoke for so many hours. Yeah.
Kia ora whanau. It's really hard to follow on that, Sabina. It's well done. First of all, thanks to you all. And recently we had a long-term plan amendment that we passed. That means the airport sale is now officially dead. And I don't see in any way how it's going to come back again next time, even though previously in 2021 it was voted down and they brought it back in 22 ministry again. And I hope that's not going to be the case in the future. My name is Nureddin Abdurahman. I grew up in a very small town called Vijayati in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, as you know by itself, is a very rich in a lot of ways, but in financial terms, the way quality of life, relatively poor. And my family and where I grew up, we are even the poorest in that community, in that society. I grew up in a council house until I was year 9 and 10. One bedroom house where we got a goat sleeping there, children sleeping in the corner, mom and dad not far away from us. And sometimes we have a chicken inside the house, we have gombisa, what you call it, you just cover it down. So I got a really interesting upbringing. From there on, my dad was a very hard worker. When I was around 14, 13, he built a bedroom house. And not long after, I moved to another city for further education because I was born in that small little town. And it's only until year 8 where you can study. From year 8 onwards, you have to move on. So my upbringing shaped a lot of my thinking. And when the airport case came in, anything when it comes to public asset, I just always say protected because just I grew up in it, and that's what I know. But the airport one, I didn't know because when you see airport as a flash thing, it's not the housing people are living in, it's not a community center where people are going. You need to dig a bit of the intellectual side and how that is important, how that monopoly is important as well. And you also need to some example how you can talk to other people. In October, I think 2023, when we signed for consultation, there was a big manipulation even back then to some of our councillors. And I did mention in my speech how we got it wrong in the 1990s when we sold electricity company. And I also mentioned how this council repeatedly doing to try to save airport previously, including in 2021. At the end of my speech, I said this: Wellingtonians are struggling with the rising cost of living, increases in rents and rates, and now cost to core services. A fire sale of our city's stake in Wellington Airport will solve none of those problems. It will make many residents lose even more than faith in our council. If it goes through and is voted for consultation, I will not waste a minute in campaigning with the community to stop the sale. And that is what I've done since then. And thanks to the Wellington, Union Wellington, and to the rest of you who supported us through that process. But it wasn't easy. Nīkau can mention some of the things, but for me the difficult part was the relationship we had amongst ourselves as left progressive councillors was used for us to be ashamed. We are breaking that, we are taking the progressive mayor down, and we shouldn't be doing those things. And sticking to your gut sometimes is not really easy when you have a friend that you trust around you, when some of the people that you have around just, they have more experience, and you also think they got good values in some other areas and they missed in some other places. So you struggle, am I wrong? Or those people who've been proven being around council previously did a lot of good job in some areas. And to be specific, when I went to council, I really love Rebecca because of her fight for living wage, and it's also on housing issues. And on this one, I was not sure if I was wrong or some of my colleagues were wrong. And that was the biggest challenge. And Nīkau can mention that as well. And the second challenge was, why don't we just keep pushing for it? Thanks to Craig getting a lot of information, to be trying to push back against the advice from the bureaucracy side. While we were going through really difficult time, and I didn't mention this anywhere else, a code of conduct was launched against me for accusing council officers in the public and doing a lot of this kind of stuff. And I didn't know what to do. And that was, we were just really struggling with Nīkau and getting our numbers around. And I ran into a good friend who also supported me when we were just fighting Uber, because I'm one of the 4 drivers who took Uber to court and winning them the bloody corporate exploit in Wellington. And the same lawyer, he looked at it and he said, oh, Nureddin, okay, and he wrote a letter back to me saying that I'm framed this way, and we sent back to the mayor, and things just a bit calmed down from their own words. Just like, there are a lot of struggle that you go through. The fourth point, the third point was when our relationship with Takahari partners was weaponized against us, saying that we are against Maori having a vote in that space. That was just right before the long-term plan vote. That was just again another challenge. From all the challenge, the one that I found really difficult was just like having the trust of so many in the community who have been supporting us during that process, including Ben and Sabina, who spent a lot of their time just thinking what that means losing this for us. So that means I felt really bad, but I have to be really good friend to some of the people that I don't share values. Taking out lunch, Nuclear for kebab, and taking out with Councillor Tony Rundle for coffee every time. And look, they are really good, you know, as a human, I always got good relationship with people, and just like, that's my nature, even when I have different values. But it was very painful to see some of my lefty colleagues on the other side. We are not talking to each other, I'm just walking, passing them with councillors from the right wing, we are going for coffee. That was really weird time. And it's beyond what you see on the paper, it's beyond what you try to, even value-wise, I have a clarity. I say, I'm not going to support this, we're going to do this, we're going to move a notice of motion, the notice of motion is going to be framed in such a way, but the nuisance that you have to go through, and some of the councillors even just like, who want to talk to us, they just ignored us to some extent. And some of the council officers, being associated with some of us, just became like we are the enemies in that space. And that was really, really difficult. And for anyone who want to set a fight in the future, what I would say is just like, sometimes stick to your guts, things will pass. And at the end, what matters the most is it was not about me. It wasn't about anyone else. It's about all of us doing that thing as we are the volunteer for this movement. And that's why I just saw myself and I said, okay, I don't have to be dragged into those fights. I don't have to be feeling bad because when I'm passing and having that coffee, that shouldn't be dragging me down. And with Nīkau as well, while we're moving the notes of motion, we had so many different notes of motions that we went through. And we tried to frame it in a way that it can be, it wouldn't be seen as negative by everyone else. One thing that I want to highlight is, regards to the manifesto, I just said, hey, Nīkau, we want to do this notice of motion, but the hierarchy when it comes to the committee, the council is the one that got most power. And a bit of unfortunate, two of our manifesto representatives in the council were meant to be supporting the mayor, what some people say that just blindly to some extent. So that puts you in a very difficult position on how you frame, we are going to debate this notice of motion in the council, not in the long-term plan committee, because they are part of the long-term plan committee. If you are taking to the council, our calculation was we have 8 votes, and we want to put the mayor in a very difficult position so she can cast her vote. She got 2 votes when such a thing happens. And taking from political side, or only from political side, not because they are Menefenwa, we are just saying that it doesn't matter if it's Nīkau, for us it's just about getting that number to pass the motion. But that was used against us, and we tried to frame it in the way we get an advice from our legal team, and they told us, yeah, this blah blah blah, and the next day, when question was raised, they says, oh, this is going to exclude the Menefenwa. That's what basically the soft motion says. And from there on, Nīkau was just, he had a really, really hard time, and it was very stressful, I'm telling you. Sometimes he was not even getting enough sleep, and I called Ben, and just like, I was really also scared of how am I going to interact with him. And even at some stage he said, is that worth it? Because when it comes to the relationship that is going to be broken, and they sent a letter to us, and I did communicate to our manufacturer partners as well. But we didn't know what to do at that stage. That was the most difficult part. So more than the value, we also have a value of just listening and working, that collaboration with our manufacturer representatives, but that was not working, especially for Nīkau. And losing Nīkau for us is just like, again, losing the vote itself as well. So we need to manage through those difficult things where I was just like, not talking to some of the lefties, I start again now going through Ben to talk to Nīkau himself as well, because I don't want to offend, because a lot of people putting pressure on him. And Ben also got really, I think I can say, a bit of the white people's complexity, or I would call it, because just like, if it's just anyone can say something in this Menefenwa, you just freak out. Because there is historically an issue there, but for me, I just said, okay, my nation is Oromo in Ethiopia. We have about 81 ethnics. That means we fight each other. One of the first things when I came to New Zealand, I was just like the chair of the Oromo community. That means just like, okay, even amongst Ethiopia, we are Oromos, and then I just like, we don't like each other. You are Muslim, you are Christian, you are from the north and from the south. So it's not all of us share the same thing. So we can accuse, which is like basically the Ethiopian who dominated the system for a very long time. They are black like me. We speak language basically the same. But when we want to politicize anything, it's just like, hey, you are the white guy. Just like, they are not white. They are black like me. But we just say, we know how to use them for our own political vote. And then that's what I told you, just like, maybe among some of our Maori people, there are individuals who try to use the real grievance is weaponized against us. And I just said, no, I'm not against any of our interests. And selling the airport is not in the interest of our community. And so that was just like, for myself, I'm not lecturing back to people, it's just like, no, I'm not going to buy it if people are going to push this to me. So I was very solid, and some of you were in that meeting until last minute when I was asking to withdraw the notice of motion. I just said, no, I'm not doing it. And one thing I was really glad, that notice of motion was meant to be, at the beginning, a similar notice of motion was written first by Brother Nīkau. And we said, who should move those things? We've been talking to each other, just like, Nīkau, you can do it. Oh, Nureddin, you can do it. Ben, you can do it. But just at some stage, I said, okay, I can do it. Later on, I said I was very happy because the pressure was just a little bit going. Ben, because of what I said, you know, his idea is just going to be like he doesn't want to be accused of stuff. And for Nīkau, I was also like, I really, really admire this young guy. I'm just telling you, I really like him for so many reasons, especially it's not easy when issues become family issue as well. For him, it was not only about value, it just became a family issue as well. He has to go through that. He has to take through those difficult times. So we did that one, we done, and even after the vote as well, there was just like a bit of negotiation before the vote, the negotiation that happened, that failed a little bit because some of the councillors who gave their confidence to us, they were just trying to negotiate with the mayor. And they just used to tell us, oh, we went to, and a good example is just from the mayor's office. I told you how I went to kebab with Nīkau, right? From the mayor's office, they went to Nīkau's house to you know, to get a vote. And the good thing is she was just calling me, hey, they came today and we did this, we talk about this, and just like, now I'm kind of feeling the Russian spy who's getting all the information, so just like bring it back to the family, just sharing with Ben and everyone else. So that was an interesting part as well. In general, what I want to say is, when such a movement happens, when such a challenge emerges, if we can see ourselves as we are only part of it, I was not trying to be the hero and trying to fight everything by myself. Even though three of us, the airport three, portrayed as we are just like the heroes. But the heroes at the time was, I'm telling you, Sabina, Ashok, Finn, doing a lot of work from behind the door. We've been spending a lot of time talking to them, and Nīkau can attest to that. And so many other people who supported us doing the research. And not taking us for granted as well, just keeping informing us on so many other areas. A good example in that space would be Councillor Pant, where we consistently just feeding all the information, trying to keep her online. Because there was influence from the other side as well. Since the organization, the manipulation, the delegation issue, the relationship I mentioned. So I'm very happy to cover some of them during question time, but I think I'll leave for Nīkau, who is really articulate on those things, and I'll say to you, brother, and thank you.
Can we just get a quick round of applause for our two previous speakers? Reorient this microphone so I can stand up with the blood flowing. Before I start, I won't take up the time. I'm aware that it's a wee bit past the hour, so I'll try to be real quick. I was emailing Benji, trying to cut our time down to as little as possible because nobody wants to hear us yet for 2 hours. So I'll start off by saying that the period that we are talking about, the period that I'm about to talk about, was probably the most personally difficult period of my young life. 25 years old, it has never got worse than that particular time. There's not only because of the airport, I also had some sort of weird health issues that were going on at the time as well, but a combination of my professional life, my personal life, and I guess my Māori life as well, all kind of combined into a period which was extremely personally difficult and caused me a great deal of trauma, which I still feel hearing all of these things come up again. So if I start to say odd things or act in a strange way, that's why. What I'm going to talk about this evening are two things. I'm going to talk about the human side to privatisation, and I'm going to talk about the logics of privatisation more generally. And I probably have some slightly different views on things than my comrades here, but I want to just emphasise that we were all in this thing together and we got the result as difficult as it possibly was. So I'll start off by saying that, you know, when I was a kid, I imagined my political opponents as mustache-twirling villains who got up every day and went to the board of Evil Things Incorporated and sort of wrote memos and it's, you know, hit $4 billion into the military-industrial complex, you know, like really deliberate, malevolent actors. And when I got into politics, I think in a lot of ways I wasn't ready for the human element of interacting with people. When the airport issue was presented to us, it came with two justifications. The first one, as was mentioned, was the fact that council was significantly underinsured. That was kind of true. But the second one was that our asset portfolio, namely the stuff that we owned in the city, was undiversified. And that as a city, we should be investing in things outside of the city, because if the big one, meaning an earthquake, were to happen in Wellington, then our whole asset portfolio would be wiped out in one fell swoop. And I kind of accepted it at the time because I was fairly inexperienced, but as I've kind of reflected back on it, it's very strange to me that, for example, you might call a bicycle shop undiversified because it sells only bicycles and bicycle apparatuses. Or you might call a water company undiversified because it manages water. And I think in that regard, a city absolutely should be invested in its own things, and a city having an asset portfolio that consists of stuff in the city seems perfectly appropriate to me, but there you go. So that was how it was sold to me. And it was also told to me that simply by selling the airport, if only we could sell our minority stake in the airport, we could do two things. Firstly, we could totally solve our insurance problem. And secondly, we could guarantee that we transfer the asset to Manawhenua, right? The local iwi. Those were the two things that got my vote initially to put the thing out to consultation. I looked at it and I saw, wow, this is a huge problem, man, this is terrible, and I can give it to the cuzzies and it's going to solve the insurance problem. That seems like a pretty responsible decision for the city, right? I solved Wellington's big insurance risk and I returned some assets to Māori. Fantastic. So that was a pretty easy vote for me. And then when the airport campaign started from these fellows, I had this interaction with Finn, who's hopped off, but I had this interaction with him at Newtown Fair, and I was like, I saw him holding this sign and people waving the banners. I'm like, man, what are you talking about? Like, don't you understand why we're doing this? And then I ruminated on that for a few weeks, and I was like, I had some more conversations. I was like, man, do I understand why we're doing this? And what I realized is that neither of those two things were true. Selling the damn thing would not totally solve our insurance crisis. Our insurance crisis was in the order of $2 or $3 billion, 2.5 to sort of 2.9 was the figure that was thrown about or thereabouts. The airport on a good day was going to sell for a sixth of that. There was no way that we were going to be able to totally address this huge problem that we had been solved. I think the phrase disaster capitalism was used. There was no way it wasn't going to do it. The second thing is you cannot pick your buyer when you are a public entity. You can't sell something and say, I'm going to sell to you first. It doesn't exist. There's a fiduciary duty to take the highest offer on the table, and it became very clear to me very quickly that iwi Māori were not going to be able to outbid a multinational corporation like Infratil. It just wasn't going to happen. And so the two bases on which my vote was attained for the initial consultation turned out to be totally false. And once I really realized that, I was like, oh man, we're going to have to stop this thing. So here we go. Here's the bit. So the logic of privatisation is pretty much always the same. There are a few steps. The first thing you do is you underfund something. This has been the strategy since kind of the fourth Labour government. It's been the same ever since Reaganomics, since Thatcheronomics, since Rogeronomics. It's the same playbook every time. You underfund something, a public service, in this case an airport, and then you say, well, it's not performing well, we've got to get rid of it, it's inefficient, we need to slim down the state, make things more efficient, deliver value for money. And so then you propose a sale. Maybe you start with a partial sale, try and kind of manufacture something. Oh, it's just, we're going to sell a minority stake to Infratil, say. And then, well, actually we're going to sell a little bit more. And then, well, look, we don't own it anyway, we don't even have a controlling stake, we better get rid of the whole thing. It happens the same way every single time they want to privatize something. You underfund it, you say it's not performing well, you sell it off. Every single time. And older folks in the room will have seen this all throughout the 80s, all throughout the 90s, all throughout the key years. It happens the same way every single time, and it was no different in this case. So the logic behind this process, and this is the kind of the core logic of neoliberalism, is that it will always be the most logical and prudent path to sell stuff off. And the reason for that is because the capitalist balance sheet looks most efficient when it is slimmest, right? Never mind democratic accountability or public ownership of things. The slimmest, most efficient way for an asset to appear on the capitalist balance sheet is to be as thin as possible. And so what this made me realize, and I guess this is where Sylvia and I had a slightly different perspective from you when they were saying, please find a solution, is I think that in a way it wasn't nefarious. I think in a way it was genuine, because when you are so wrapped up in this particular capitalist neoliberal logic of privatization, you legitimately can't conceptualize any kind of logical or prudent solution outside of that process that I described just before. You're totally wrapped up in it. You can't see an alternative. And I think a lot of inexperienced politicians, in our case, really did totally drink the Kool-Aid and got wrapped up in that 3-4-step process of privatization. They didn't see another solution. You know, no one, someone made a joke to me once, no one wakes up in the morning and decides to be a menace, right? Everyone's the good guy in his or her own head, you know what I mean? And so what I found really challenging as a kind of a fairly young political actor is talking to these people that I was supposed to share all my politics with, that I was supposed to agree with, right? And they were talking like Roger Douglas. it was really bizarre, and I'm like, you think you're doing the right thing. I think I'm doing the right thing. We're supposed to share about politics. How are we getting to a different point? It was one of the strangest, most alienating feelings I think I've ever had. And what it made me realize that because this logic is so hegemonic and so all-encompassing in New Zealand society, the whole of society, as one historian called it, you know, people don't have the ability to conceptualize something else. You can't think outside of that paradigm. You can't think outside the box. You know, nobody is at the wheel. It's not, you know, my committee of mustache-twirling villains. It's just normal people doing what they think is the most logical thing. But the problem is the logic that they're following is the one that has kind of consumed us as a society since the 80s, and the one that we keep falling for. And so what is actually required to escape this logic is a really active swimming against the current. And I think that's what Nureddin and I and our colleagues felt when we decided to kind of go for this, is we were like, holy hecka, things were so easy when you had the organisation behind us. We could do anything, you know what I mean? Like, it was so, we had a majority on council, the staff were broadly on our side, we could do anything, we could pass whatever amendment we wanted. Actually, man, I lament the loss of that power. That was a heck of a thing. But as soon as you go against the logic of neoliberal capitalism, everything changes. You are literally swimming against the current. It's like wading through treacle. It is so difficult to get anything done. Every roadblock possible will be thrown in your way. Every process roadblock. You know, I didn't want to, I'll talk about this a bit, but I didn't want to exclude Manawhenua from our deliberations, and so I put the matter to a committee in which they were included, and that was declined on process reasons. We tried to get you know, various other ways of getting it, declined on process reasons. Every possible roadblock that they could put up to stop us was put up. And so I just want to talk a bit about the kind of the Māori side of things, because that was the thing that really, I'm just going to say traumatized me. It's a big word, but I think it is actually correct. I still do have nightmares about this, and I still have this horrible knotted feeling in my stomach whenever I think about it. The crux of the issue was only the council, as in elected councillors, can sell a strategic asset. That's the law. Problem is, all of the decision making for our big plan was being made at a kind of a lower committee level where we had our iwi reps rightfully on that panel. And so we ultimately were forced, because of all those roadblocks that I was telling you about, you know, they stopped us here, they stopped us here, they stopped us here, they stopped us here. Eventually, we had to just put the issue to council itself, but in doing so, we excluded mana whenua from the vote because they weren't on council. They're being appointed rather than elected. And this was the hardest thing for me. And it didn't need to be this way. You know, they knew they didn't have the votes. They knew it would come to council eventually. They knew that whatever happens down at that committee level, it was never going to pass muster once they got up to council. They knew that. It was never going to happen. But they insisted on staying strong and staying hard and staying in the fight, giving no concessions whatsoever. And eventually we got to the point where the matter just had to be put to council. And I felt sick. I turned up that day, and my choice was either betray my word, because I gave my word that I would never vote for the sale of the airport once I learned those new facts. I made that promise to the people of Wellington. I was on record in the newspapers as saying so. But then my only other option was to explicitly endorse the exclusion of my own family, my own farmer, from the vote. It was the kind of choice that no 24-year-old probably should ever have to make, and it ate me up inside for months on end. I didn't get enough sleep. I didn't probably sleep more than 4 or 5 hours a night for months. I was throwing up at one point. Like I would wake up in the night kind of thinking the vote had happened. It was a horrible experience. And I got there in the morning, and I called my dad the morning of, and I won't reveal what that conversation was, but essentially I decided that I have to keep my word. You know, a promise is a promise, I have to keep my word. So I went up and I voted on the matter that was before me. I think it was wrong, what we did. Personally, I think this is maybe a difference that I have with my colleagues. I think the fact that we put the matter to full council was wrong, and it was a violation of tikanga, which is the law of this land. But we were forced into that position because we had been denied at every single point that we tried to do it tika. We tried to do it the right way. And eventually they took all those options from us, and it had to go there. And so I simply voted, don't sell the airport, and do a long-term plan. And I voted down everything else. I was kind of a swing vote. And on that basis, I think I succeeded in pissing off everybody. But the matter was settled and the airport was not sold. And so I suppose the point that I'm really trying to make is, on the human side of things, no one wakes up and decides to be a daddy. People really think they're doing the right thing. Whatever their beliefs, they really think they are doing the right thing. The problem is the all-encompassing logics of neoliberalism sometimes make it logical to do the wrong thing. And I guess those are the key points I'll leave you with today. I won't talk too much longer. Q&A? Choice. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do a Q&A, but we'll just have maybe just a 5-minute pause just to get drinks and stretch your legs. Come back here. We'll say 25-2 for the Q&A. Okay, we'll continue now with the Q&A part. But I just wanted to say one more reminder that sign-up sheets for the Social Society somewhere, so you can come hear about our events and join if you want to, and you also get a free copy of the Common Wheel if you join. But yeah, anyway, we'll move on to the Q&A, and I will start with the first question. And it's kind of 2 questions, but it's just, how has it got to the point where the left, in a city like Wellington, with, like supposedly left-wing parties dominating the council, is spending its time chasing the bureaucracy or resisting the bureaucracy? And I'm just thinking in regards to this upcoming election where the Green Party is endorsing people who, have very questionable history and had questionable roles in the whole airport sale debacle. Why is it not the left sort of putting out its own program, the left and the union movement putting out its own program and running councillors that are committing to that and fighting for that and having the bureaucracy resist us? And the sort of second part of that is sort of related in regards to involving workers. This could be more for you, Sabina, is was there any attempt to involve airport workers in this? And if there was or wasn't, how could we involve in future campaigns around local government issues? How could we involve workers in the affected areas of such campaigns?
Okay, so the first question, as I understand it, is why did the left do this? And why aren't we now running people who want to? Is that pretty much the question? So, okay. First thing, why did the left do this? To my mind, two reasons. The first one, inexperience. We were not prepared for the sophistication of the way the issue would be solved to us. And we had an inadequate understanding of that process of privatisation. I didn't understand. I'm just going to own up. I didn't understand what it would be like when I was elected. And I didn't know. And I think a lot of people were not ready for that kind of a scrap. The second reason is because in the 21st century thing that kind of passes itself off as leftism, there is or I guess, no, that's me. In, I guess, the kind of 21st century progressive ideology, there is a focus on outcomes. And I think there is this idea that so long as the outcome, the delivery is the term that just I feel disgusting when using, about the delivery of services, so long as that happens, it doesn't matter how we get there or who's doing it. And I think that focus on outcomes is a really short-sighted way to run a city and to run a country and to run a community, because and to run a world indeed. I think that if all you care about is that people get water in their tap, you'll sell water. I think if, to a company that says they'll get that more efficiently than anyone else. If all you care about is people have a slightly lower rates bill, you'll sell the airport and invest in, tobacco and munitions. There is a point at which the ends do not justify the means, and I think that is what the modern left have lost sight of. To answer the second part, why are we not standing people across the board who are not going to do this kind of thing again? It's because we're all splitters and we're all fractious. And there has not been a real attempt to create a shared, unified, left-wing program for Wellington. I flirted with the idea, but I was just so depressed at the time that I couldn't bring myself to do it. But I think if the left is going to make real progress in the city and is going to not do this kind of thing again, is we have to put aside our differences, Greens, Labour, whatever, put our heads together and find a whole bunch of stuff we can all agree on, and then hold our candidates to it. That is the way we're going to make progress. So do you
Is it on? Yeah, well, let me tell you about a little thing called the Unions Wellington Charter.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, coming to an inbox near you, surely. But I guess I would say that the issue of public ownership and its connections to economic democracy and the general idea that if somebody, so there's a lot of talk in terms of whether or not supposedly central government parties should be involved in local politics. And I guess from my perspective, there are a lot of people who do not necessarily live and breathe politics in the same way that maybe I do as a union official, or these two do as actual politicians. And it is actually quite helpful for there to be manifestos that people can feel like they are signing on to. And so maybe you don't necessarily know who the Green Party is standing in your ward in a particularly intimate way, but you do know what the Green Party represents, and you know what they stand for, and maybe you read their manifesto the last time it got updated. And so therefore you can know when you're putting your vote next to such and such candidate who is being run by that party, what they represent. And so I think that it is extremely disappointing to see there being candidates who have voted against the party manifestos, because I think that is a betrayal of the constituents who voted for them, because not everybody is. If you wanted to vote for an individual candidate and you wanted to read up on everything that they individually supported, then lots of people maybe have the time to do that, and they do, and that's all very lovely. But one of the reasons why parties run candidates is because the party is the movement, and the individuals are sort of incidental to that. They are representative of the party's values, and they are carrying those values forward. And you, as a representative of that party, don't actually get to just make decisions based on your own values. You actually have to make decisions based on the commitments that you've made publicly. And those could be personal commitments that you make at a forum, but they could also be commitments that you make when you sign up to a party's manifesto. And the fact that people, that is allowed to continue is, I think, it's gross. In terms of workers' involvement in the campaign, so there's kind of twofold to this. In terms of future local government campaigns that Unions Wellington is running, we're trying to get workers involved from the areas of kind of interest of what we're trying to do at a ground level really early on. There is, in terms of like the development of what we want to do, what is kind of difficult is that often workers at particular sites, particularly when something is becoming particularly, I've said the word particularly like 4 times, when it's becoming public facing, it can be quite hard to get somebody who actually works in that workforce to come out and say, my employer shouldn't be sold to such and such, because they often have things in their contract that say that they're literally not allowed to do that, but also it can become quite a personal liability for somebody in their workplace. And so we did get in touch with a few different organisers who organised workers in areas at the airport. Wellington Airport Company doesn't actually employ that many people. Wellington Airport Company contracts a lot of different workers into that. So I know at one point we had a firefighter who worked on the airport who gave us a bit of a statement to share on their behalf, but they didn't want their name attributed to it, and they weren't able to come and present that statement because they didn't feel like that would be appropriate. And it was sort of similar in the sense that we have contacts who work at the council, and again, even though they may have a vested interest on what their employer has shareholdings in, and they maybe work for the council because they believe in good governance and public ownership and all of those sorts of things. The idea that you would stand up there as a council employee and say, my employer is not going to, I don't think my employer should make this decision, can be quite complicated, particularly in the realm of people who work within the public service or local government, because they often hold themselves to quite high regard in terms of impartiality and being respectful of their role as public servants. So, which I'm an organiser for the PSA, and so we see that across a lot of our organisations, and it is sort of part of their responsibilities of workers in that space. So I guess that's a very long way of saying that we would like more workers to be involved in all aspects of campaigns around, like all aspects of Unions Wellington campaign directly impacted workers, but there were a few difficulties in terms of having directly impacted worker voices be visible in this campaign. Obviously, Unions Wellington is a bunch of workers coming together, and so all of the people who turned out to our actions and supported the campaign generally and were part of the campaign were, union members and officials and delegates. But I don't know, we didn't have a lot of sort of people who worked at the airport, union members, officials and delegates, publicly being faced.
Okay, and we've probably got time for just 2 questions from the audience. We'll start over here.
My specific knowledge about this is a bit limited because I'm a foreigner. But my understanding is that Infratel owns 66% of the airport.
Yes.
So they're obviously commercially vested in the outcome of the sale, and they have a lot of money. Were they politically an actor in this behind the scenes, because they have the resources to affect the they would have had the resources to affect the outcome?
That's a good question.
That's an interesting question. I think I'm not gonna, you can frame it in your own ways. I'm going to tell you a story and some examples, and then you can say is that a good answer or not. I'll leave it up to you. There was a councillor who been chairing Airport for a very long time, airport actually, airport board, and he did run to be a councillor, and some people say that he got two priorities when he joined council. One is related to housing, the other was the airport share sale. And during the discussion, we had a lot of discussion with him, debate, and to some extent, and I was told one day, as one of the councillors, said, hey, you are in number one hit with this councillor's number one hit now. What happened between you two? I said, why? I don't even know. And just later on, there was a joke. The same councillor saying why he was in the room, and the discussion started. And I said, is that because you have a share in an interest? For which he said in a very haram way, I can't say it. So, another councillor who also had a share in Infratel, right before the vote, she told me she sold her share just to get a vote, and she voted against the sale of the share. And she said she's gonna buy it back later. And she was smart. The reason is just if you look at it. Recently, Wellington Airport, Infratel released the share value increase only for this year, and it increased by 332 million. And when it comes to Wellington City Councils, the value increased by almost 50%, about $150 million. And last year we got, as a dividend, $22 million. And this year we will know in 2 weeks' time, I expect, if not more, the same amount that we had last year. So there is a political side of it, but I think they were just not really sure when the motion in October 2023, when the amendment was passed saying that we will sell it to Manafela. And the FTO, they know, but they didn't say anything. They were just quietly waiting at the time. But I'm glad. It doesn't matter. I think it's not about them. It's not about the bureaucracy at council. What matters the most is having dedicated politicians who can listen to you, who can value their community, who value the volunteer that door knock for them, who value the value they share. When anyone joins any political party or any movement, they are joining for the common cause, for the common value they want to push the society forward for. And when you promise, you don't promise. When you do, you keep it. In this case, I'm glad majority of councillors, they supported, they kept their promise. For those who didn't, I think it's up to the community to decide. Election is coming, and just Nīkau is not running, and Sabina is not running. Since I'm running, my volunteer team is really working really hard, and any of you are welcome to support. And we also got Sam, who is running in the Eastern Ward, and is a good guy. And we can ask him, would you sell airport if you join?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. So there you go. So I think you can get a bit of answer from what I say, and indirectly.
Who are Infratel running against you? Sorry.
Well,
Sorry, food.
they can run anyone, but what matters the most is just people. Just like we got a really good. In the south is, for those of you who might not know, Nīkau Wi. This is the most progressive, lovely part of the city, and majority of them, actually, compared to any other areas, they supported, not to say the airport, and I represent my community. That's what I'm just push for it. And yeah, I think there are people who join politics for different reasons. As Nīkau before said, I disagree. There are some people who just wake up in the morning to be that. I'm not going to say that. To be that, okay? So there are good people. There are people who just want to wake up every morning. I'm just going to give working people a hard time. I'm just going to find a way we can tailor the share of the city. I'm just going to make life miserable for those who are really already finding it difficult. Why they do? I'll leave that. That's not. I'm not British. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I just.
Okay, we've got probably time for one more question if it can be brief. Right, yeah, over here.
Yeah, I just have one question. I just was wondering, the councillors, what their thoughts were sort of on the government's reaction after the sale of the airport was turned down, because the timing seemed quite convenient from their side. I mean, obviously they do have a history of wanting to bash down on Wellington City Council, but in following that particular week, they were really, really strong in their language, talking about how they're considering all their options, how action needs to be taken. And I think they eventually put in a commissioner. So do you think it was just sort of a coincidence, or do you think that was them sort of pushing their, like trying to punish the council because the council went against their ideological narrative of, the public owning assets, basically?
I'll just, if anyone didn't hear that, the question is about central government's role in this.
Well, I think the kind of central government we currently have is the one that is cutting pay equity for those who are working, really struggling in the community, the one that sees the community to be divided alongside all fault lines. So the minister who appointed an observer, he got it wrong, to be honest, in this case. Did council help in the way the council been doing this job? No. What is the threshold for minister to do to send an observer? I think that is well-established fact out there. I don't think so that threshold has been met. Interestingly today, the observer said one thing. We had a meeting around 4 o'clock, and he will be including in his report for future to be an indicator for when ministers can have some actions. What is the indicator? What is happening with that council? And I said, when you do this, what is the motive and why are you doing that? Do you believe that your appointment was wrong, or your appointment was not in the right time, or you think your appointment was a bit too late? He didn't answer to that question, but I have the answer. Just from myself, I think politicization of it's easy for the government to hit on Wellington at that time, and people are very angry at their council because of so many reasons. Even when this council, to be honest with you, let alone when we're getting things wrong, even when we do things right, we do it in the wrong way. A very interesting council, honestly, just like we find a way, even when we do positive things, to piss people off. It is a nice thing, instead of telling the good story and doing it, taking our communities with us, we just find a way to piss them off. So they quickly realized that central government, and they said, oh, politically it's good to hit those councillors and punch down, and so we can get support. And that is my take, and I absolutely think. And the minister who did, he's known for his kindness.
Great. Look, the year prior to all of this happening, we were at the local government conference. For those of you who thankfully have not been to a local government conference, it happens every year. A whole bunch of councillors, local board members get together in a big old room, staff, etc. Central government sends people, Minister for Local Government's usually there. Prime Minister's usually their deputy, sometimes shows up. Anyway, it's the big local government kind of hoo-ha happens every year. It was in Wellington, it was in Parkina. First thing the Prime Minister did when he got up on the stage to give his big old address to all the councillors in the country that could make it up, oh, this building's a big waste of money. Next thing he said is, we're going to be getting councils back to basics. And he outlined 4 things that he was going to do, which included like rates capping, like the central government artificially capping the amount of rates that local governments can charge, requiring councils to report back on doing core services, whatever the heck that means, and a whole bunch of other things which together represented probably the most egregious breach and overstep of central government relationship to local government that I have ever seen in my life, and probably in my parents' life as well. You know, the last sacking of the city council was Tauranga, right? And that was a pretty high bar. They seriously, the mayor couldn't look in the eyes of his councillors. It was not working.
The mayor resigned.
Indeed. And so there was a fairly high bar for that intervention to take place. And I found it incredible, like seriously incredible. Wouldn't have believed it if you had told me, you know, a year earlier, that the party that ran on localism and given part, you know, given up, I don't know what I'm doing in Australia, it's my subtle xenophobia. but like the party that ran on localism and empowering local government was just totally lying. Like it was just a total reversal, and the overstep was incredible. And you know, I think to answer your question, it was partially a symptom of that big turnaround in policy. You know, they knew that the stuff they were going to be doing in this part of the term was going to be unpopular, and so they really wanted to smash local government to take a bit of the heat off them in that regard. Also, I think, just to be frank about it, I think green bashing is kind of the flavour of the day, and I think it's a really easy thing to do. And I think they knew that having lost a couple of seats in Wellington to Greens, they really were going to go hard at the slightest scent of dysfunction. And particularly having a Green mayor, they knew they could just go for it. And I think you can see that reflected in the language that the Prime Minister used, that the Finance Minister used, that the Minister for Local Government at the time used. And I just want to push back on that. Again, I'm not standing again, so this isn't a campaign speech, but the reason I was able to break ranks, if you like, and do what I did was because I had the support of dozens and dozens and dozens of Green members who came to our local communities, who showed up wearing those flash t-shirts that your mate designed, that were really serious about keeping public ownership of assets. And I just want to make it really clear that it's not necessarily a party issue. You know, both progressive parties have people who broke ranks and went one way or the other, and that there are good progressive people throughout the city of all shapes, sizes, colours and t-shirts. And what is going to be required to prevent central government and indeed local government from doing this again is some serious consensus building and some serious setting aside of differences. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay, let's just give our panelists one more round of applause. And we'll wrap things up there. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.